December 10th is a day of recognition for those who have contributed to great discoveries and changes in our world. Welcome to this special edition of NHK Newsline. We'll be bringing you live coverage of the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony of 2017 taking place in Oslo, Norway. I'm Minori Takao. Now, every year, the Nobel Awards ceremonies take place on this date, and this year, an organization calling for a world without nuclear weapons has won the Peace Prize. ICAN stands for International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And in the studio with me is NHK Newsline's Editor-in-Chief, Miki Ebara. Miki, this really is a significant day, isn't it?
It is, especially for those who survived the atomic bombing's devastation back in 1945 in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They have, for more than 7 decades, have pushed hard for denuclearization. The organization ICAN has made the survivors' voices and plea into a global movement. So we'll talk about that later while we watch the ceremony.
Right, you'll be giving us insight throughout the ceremony feed. So let's go straight to Oslo and look at what's going on now at the ceremony venue. The venue is the Oslo City Hall. Guests have already taken their seats, and they are waiting for the laureate to come into the hall, it seems. Miki, we can hear music, can't we? Very, very, very quietly. Now, this music is Carillon music. It's called Piece of Peace. Among the guests, of course, there's people from Japan, and that includes the hibakshas.
Yes, ICAN's campaigner Setsuko Thurlow is a hibakusha. She will receive the prize jointly with Beatrice Finn, who is the executive director of ICAN. And 2 of Japan's leading figures of anti-nuclear campaign will witness the ceremony also. 85-year-old Terumi Tanaka from Nagasaki and 73-year-old Toshiki Fujimori from Hiroshima.
Well, the word hibakusha is a Japanese word, but it's become a global word now, hasn't it?
Yes, it means survivors of the nuclear bombs. It literally means people who have been exposed to radiation. But we will hear that term probably many times in the speeches today.
Also, the current mayors of the 2 cities, which were once devastated by the bombings, Mayor Kazumiya Matsuyo of Hiroshima and Nagasaki Mayor Tomihisa Taue, are in the hall, aren't they?
Yes. Also from Japan, Akira Kawasaki, who is a key Japanese member of ICAN, who connected hibakushas and the global organization. And
Miki, you actually spoke with Mr. Kawasaki, and so today, later on, we'll be able to listen to your interview with him as well.
Now, the ceremony is taking place at Oslo City Hall, and we are seeing the royal family.
Yes, guests are arriving at this main venue. And we have seen the arrival of Beatrice Finn, the ICAN Executive Director, along with Setsuko Thurlow, Hiroshima atomic bomb survivor and ICAN campaigner.
Beatrice Finn has been the executive director of ICANN since 2014. ICANN was founded in 2007, so a rather young organization, but it has a large network of more than 460 member organizations in over 100 countries. And Ms. Finn previously worked with Reaching Critical Will, an advocacy and analysis program for disarmament.
We also saw Ms. Setsuko Thurlow. She was in a wheelchair as she entered, but now she is walking, yes, up onto the stage, along with Beatrice Finn.
Ms. Setsuko Thurlow in the black dress. It seems as if she is in a kimono dress.
Yes, it's beautiful. We are now seeing the entering of the Norwegian royal family. King Harald, Queen Sonja, Crown Prince Haakon, and Crown Princess Mette-Marit.
And they are accompanied by Berit Reiss-Andersen, the chair of the Norwegian Nobel Peace Prize Committee. She will present the award to the laureate and will also deliver a speech explaining the significance of this year's prize.
Now, as we listen to soprano Beat Mordal, Miki, can you tell us a bit about the Nobel Peace Prize and why it's always been awarded in the capital of Norway?
Yes, the Peace Prize was created by Alfred Nobel, the Swedish chemist who invented dynamite, among other things, and became very wealthy in the 19th century. Actually, nobody knows the reason why Nobel chose Norway for the ceremony, whereas the other Nobel categories like chemistry, physics, physiology, or medicine and literature are awarded in the Swedish capital. When Nobel died on December 10th, 1896, exactly 121 years ago, he left a will specifying the prize be awarded by a committee of 5 people chosen by the Parliament of Norway. At the time, Norway was ruled in union with Sweden. So some speculate it may be that Nobel thought Norway had some distance from Sweden, which had a more militaristic tradition, or that the Peace Prize should not be mixed up with Sweden's politics, but we simply don't know.
Well, so he left instructions in his will. When was the first prize awarded?
It was in 1901, and it was shared between Frenchman Frederic Passy, who was a peace activist who founded the first French Peace Society, and Swiss Jean-Henri Dunant, who founded the Red Cross. Over the years, winners have included people such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Mother Teresa. More recently, you may recall notable recipients include Malala Yousafzai from Pakistan in 2014, or Chinese human rights activist Liu Xiaobo in 2010, who passed away this year.
Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, distinguished representatives of the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN, has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for 2017. On behalf of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, I take great pleasure in congratulating ICAN on its award.
You are listening to Berit Reiss-Andersen, Chair of the Norwegian Nobel Committee.
ICAN is receiving the award for its work to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and for its groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons. ICAN's efforts have given new momentum to the process of abolishing nuclear weapons. This year's Peace Prize follows in a tradition of awards that have honored efforts against the proliferation of nuclear weapons and for nuclear disarmament. 12 Peace Prizes have been awarded in whole or in part for this type of peace work. The first went to Philip Noel Baker in 1959, and the recent award to Barack Obama in 2009, and now this year to ICAN. On 2 days in August 1945, the world experienced the terrible destructive force of nuclear weapons for the first time. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki instantly killed at least 140,000 people, the vast majority of whom were civilians. Hiroshima was utterly destroyed, and large sections of Nagasaki were laid in ruins. But death was not finished with Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. The death toll continued to rise significantly in the years that followed, and survivors are still today suffering from the effects of radiation. The devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki has taught us that nuclear weapons are so dangerous and inflict so much agony and death on civilian populations that they must never ever be used again. Today's nuclear weapons are tremendously more destructive than the bombs that were dropped in Japan in 1945. A nuclear war could kill millions of people, dramatically alter climate and the environment for much of the planet, and destabilize societies in a way never before seen by humanity. The notion of a limited nuclear war is an illusion. Nuclear weapons do not distinguish between military and civilian targets. Used in war, they would impact disproportionately on the civilian population, inflicting vast, unnecessary suffering. It is virtually impossible for civilians to protect themselves against the catastrophic consequences of nuclear attack. The use of nuclear weapons, or even the threat of using them, is therefore unacceptable by any grounds, whether humanitarian, moral, or legal. Despite all this, the case is that the global balance of military powers is maintained by nuclear weapons. The logic of this balance of terror rests on the proposition that nuclear weapons are such a deterrent that no one would dare to attack a nuclear-armed state. The deterrent effect is said to be so strong that it alone has prevented war between the nuclear powers for the last 70 years. The empirical basis for this assumption is highly debatable. It cannot be claimed with any certainty that deterrence has worked as intended. It is also worth keeping in mind that nuclear deterrence requires a credible threat to actually use nuclear weapons. The weapons exist so that they can, if necessary, be deployed. A number of international agreements and treaties have been entered into which limit the possession and development of nuclear weapons. The most important of these is the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or NPT. It takes considerable military and political insight to fully understand all the treaties, agreements, and international legal instruments that regulate disarmament and arms control. The views that dominate the political debate are those of the great powers and powerful alliances. ICAN arose as a protest against the established order. Nuclear weapon issues are not solely a question to be addressed by governments, nor a matter for experts or high-level politicians. Nuclear weapons concern everyone, and everybody is entitled to an opinion. ICAN has succeeded in generating fresh engagement among ordinary people in the campaign against nuclear weapons. The organization's acronym is perhaps not a coincidence: ICAN. ICAN's main message is that the world can never be safe as long as we have nuclear weapons. The message resonates with millions of people who perceive that the threat of nuclear war is greater than it has been for a long time, not least to the situation in North Korea. Another major concern of ICAN is that the current international legal order is inadequate to deal with the nuclear weapons problem. The entry into force of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970 was an historical breakthrough. It gave formal status to the nuclear powers of the day, the United States, the Soviet Union, United Kingdom, France, and China, as states with the legal right to possess nuclear weapons. All other countries that acceded to the treaty pledged, in so doing, not to acquire such weapons. In return, the legally recognized nuclear weapon states undertook to begin negotiations in good faith to seek nuclear disarmament. This dual pledge is the very core of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and both sides of it must be honored to maintain the treaty's legitimacy. But ladies and gentlemen, it is no to say that the nuclear weapon states have only to a limited degree honored this pledge and the disarmament commitment they made in the NPT. Let me remind you that in the year 2000, the NPT Review Conference stated that the treaty calls for an unequivocal undertaking by the nuclear weapon states to accomplish the total elimination of their arsenals, leading to nuclear disarmament. From an international law perspective, the 5 legally recognized nuclear weapon states and their allies have thus assumed the responsibility to help achieve disarmament and a world free of nuclear weapons. If the disarmament process had been carried out as intended, ICAN's struggle for a treaty-based ban on nuclear weapons would have been unneeded. It is the lack of progress towards nuclear disarmament that has made the necessity to supplement the Non-Proliferation Treaty with other international legal initiatives and commitments. The NPT applies only to the countries that have acceded to it. India, Pakistan, and Israel, which all have nuclear weapons, are not NPT members. Moreover, North Korea, which has carried out 6 nuclear test explosions, has withdrawn from the treaty. Global nuclear disarmament cannot take place without these countries too participating. Yet they reserve themselves the same right to nuclear weapons as the 5 states that has acquired such weapons prior to 1970. The 5 legally recognized nuclear weapon states, for their part, cite the nuclear arsenals for these countries are one of the several arguments for not yet beginning to comply with the NPT's nuclear disarmament requirements. It is part to this vicious cycle that ICAN has advocated a universal treaty-based ban on nuclear weapons. ICAN does not accept that the lack of progress towards nuclear disarmament is a realpolitik necessity. ICAN's premise is humanitarian, maintaining that any use of nuclear weapons will cause unacceptable human suffering. Binding international prohibitions have already been established for chemical weapons, biological weapons, landmines and cluster weapons, precisely because of the harm and suffering that these weapons inflict on civilian populations. It defies common sense that nuclear weapons, which are far more dangerous, are not subject to a comparable ban under international law. Pointing out this legal gap was a crucial first step on the road to a prohibition treaty. Another important step was the humanitarian pledge initiated by the Austrian government in December 2014. The pledge is a voluntary national commitment to seek to stigmatize, prohibit, and eliminate nuclear weapons. ICAN has worked resolutely to muster broad international support for the humanitarian pledge. To date, 129 states have signed on to this commitment. ICAN has also been a driving force in efforts to secure a binding international ban on nuclear weapons. On 7 July 2017, a final draft treaty was endorsed by 129 UN member states. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons opened up for signatures this autumn and has been signed so far by 56 states. When 50 or more states have also ratified the treaty, it will become binding under international law and for the signatory states. ICAN is a young organization founded in 2007 on the initiative of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985. ICAN is a loose coalition of 468 NGOs from more than 100 countries. It is impressive that ICAN is able to unite so many different groups in support for a common goal and give a voice to millions of people who are convinced that nuclear weapons do not provide security, but insecurity. In awarding this year's Peace Prize to ICAN, the Norwegian Nobel Committee seeks to honor this remarkable endeavor to serve the interest of mankind. The Nobel Committee believes that an international ban on nuclear weapons will be an important and possibly decisive step on the road to a world without nuclear weapons. Such a goal is fully consistent with the essence of Alfred Nobel's will. Ladies and gentlemen, ICAN's support for a global ban on nuclear weapons is not uncontroversial. We must acknowledge that the treaty has powerful opponents, but the idea of prohibiting and abolishing nuclear weapons is neither naive nor is it new. As early as in 1946, in the UN General Assembly's very first resolution, the United Nations called for nuclear disarmament and international nuclear weapons control regime. At the Reykjavik summit in 1986, Mikhail Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan tried to halt the spiraling nuclear arms race between the two superpowers and came close to concluding an agreement to abolish all long-range missiles. A year and a half earlier, President Reagan had addressed the people of the United States and the Soviet Union directly by saying, "A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The only value in our two nations possessing nuclear weapons is to make sure they will never be used. But then, would it not be better to do away with them entirely?" Today, it is more important than ever to support this vision. While the global community may trust that no responsible head of state would ever order another nuclear attack, we have no guarantees that it will not happen. Despite international legal commitments, irresponsible leaders can come to power in any nuclear-armed state and become embroiled in serious military conflict that veer out of control. Ultimately, nuclear weapons are controlled by human beings. In spite of advanced security mechanisms and control systems, technical and human errors can occur with potentially catastrophic consequences. Can we be sure that the control systems of the nuclear powers will not someday be sabotaged by hackers acting on the behalf of hostile states, terrorists, or extremists? In short, nuclear weapons are so dangerous that the only responsible course of action is to work for their removal and destruction. Many people think that the vision of a nuclear weapon-free world, global zero, is utopic or even irresponsible. Similar arguments were once used to oppose the treaties banning biological and chemical weapons, cluster weapons, and landmines. Nonetheless, the prohibitions became a reality, and most of these weapons are far less prevalent today as a result. Using them is taboo. Ladies and gentlemen, the Norwegian Nobel Committee is aware that nuclear weapons disarmament presents far greater challenges than disarmament of the types of weapons I just mentioned. But there is no getting around the fact that the nuclear weapon states have committed through the NPT to work towards disarmament. This is the ultimate objective of the treaty. Through its efforts, ICAN has reminded the nuclear weapon states that their commitment entails a genuine obligation, and the time to honor it is now. In his Nobel lecture in 1959, Philip Noel Baker took issue with the widely held opinion that complete nuclear disarmament is impossible to achieve in the real world. He quoted another Peace Prize laureate, Fridtjof Nansen, and he said, "The difficult is what takes a little while, the impossible, what takes a little longer." The people of ICAN are impatient and visionary, but they are not naive. ICAN recognizes that the nuclear-armed states cannot eliminate their nuclear weapons overnight. This must be achieved through a mutual, gradual, and verifiable disarmament process. But it is the hope of ICAN and the Norwegian Nobel Committee that an international legal ban and a broad popular engagement will put pressure on all nuclear-armed states and expedite the process. Ladies and gentlemen, there are two persons on the podium today who each in their way are outstanding representatives of the ICAN movement. Madame Setsuko Thurlow, you were 13 years old when you experienced the bombing of Hiroshima. You have devoted your life to bearing witness to the events of 6 August 1945. You see it as your mission to describe the suffering, fear, and death inflicted on your city. No one was spared. Little children, their parents, brothers, sisters, schoolmates, and grandparents were killed. You say that war cannot be waged in this way, and it must never happen again. You do not allow us to forget. Beatrice Finn, you are the Executive Director of ICAN and have the challenging task of uniting different organizations and interest groups in pursuit of a common goal. You are such a splendid representative of the multitude of idealists who forego an ordinary career and instead devote all of their time and skills to work for achieving a peaceful world. It is an honor to have you here as our guests, and we wish to express our deep-felt gratitude for the work that you do. And our tribute also goes to all the individuals and organizations that both of you represent. The decision to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2017 to ICAN has a solid grounding in Alfred Nobel's will. The will specifies 3 different criteria for awarding the Peace Prize: the promotion of fraternity between nations, the advancement of disarmament and arms control, and the holding and promotion of peace congresses. ICAN works vigorously to achieve nuclear disarmament. ICAN has a majority of UN member states. ICAN and the majority of UN member states have contributed to fraternity between nations by supporting the humanitarian pledge. And through its inspiring and innovative support for the UN negotiations on a nuclear weapon ban treaty, ICAN has played an important role in bringing about what in our day and age is equivalent to an international peace congress. In closing, I would like to quote His Holiness Pope Francis, who recently declared, "Weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons, create nothing but a false sense of security. They cannot constitute the basis for peaceful coexistence between members of the human family, which must rather be inspired by an ethics of solidarity." The Norwegian Nobel Committee shares this view. Moreover, it is our firm conviction that ICAN, more than anyone else, has in the past year given the efforts to achieve a world without nuclear weapons a new direction and a new vigor. Thank you very much.
Those powerful words from Chair of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, Berit Reiss-Andersen, saying the nuclear weapons must never, ever be used again. They are echoing from the hall in Oslo to the world.
I now call upon the representatives of the Nobel Peace Prize Laureate 2017 to step forward to receive the diploma and the gold medal.
So we're seeing Beatrice Finn of ICANN taking Ms. Setsko Thurlow's hand as they are to receive the Nobel diploma and the Nobel medal.
Every year, the diploma is different in the artwork, and it looks like a woman holding a baby this year.
Nikki, can you tell us a bit more about Setsko Thurlow?
Yes. In that speech that was delivered just now, as you would hear, but she was 13 years old at the time of the bombing. And she later studied in the US and married a Canadian historian and moved there. She said she started her anti-nuclear activism in 1954 after the hydrogen bomb detonation at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands by the US. Since then, she's traveled all over the world to share her testimony.
Yes, we can see Ms. Thurlow's big smile there, along with Beatrice Finn of ICANN, celebrating the winning of this Peace Prize.
And you see some tears in the crowd as well.
Yes, they rob us. Sold I to the merchant ships. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit. But my hands were made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever had, redemption songs, redemption songs. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. We won't kill with atomic energy. We won't let them stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom.
This song is called Redemption Song, and it's famous song by Bob Marley. In 1980 it was released.
This is John Lennon singing it, but yes.
He just sang "Have no fear for atomic energy" because none of them can stop the time.
So a song that was really chosen for this moment today. Well, Miki, can we say that 2017 is a landmark year for the global anti-nuclear movement?
It certainly is. In July, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty, was adopted by a vote of 122 against 1 at the United Nations. The parties to the treaty consider any use of nuclear weapons contrary to the rules of international humanitarian law, and it prohibits each state from developing, testing, producing, possessing, or stockpiling nuclear weapons, threatening their use, or allowing any installation or deployment of nuclear weapons is also prohibited. ICAN pushed governments in many parts of the world to come together to create this treaty.
Was all I ever had.
And then came, of course, this announcement that the Nobel Peace Prize would be awarded to ICAN. Were members of the organization expecting the news?
I was wondering that too, so I asked Kawasaki-san, the Japanese key member of the group, if he was, in an interview I did right before he left for Oslo, but he said no, it was out of blue. He had thought because of the treaty, maybe some anti-nuclear advocate could be the recipient, but not ICAN. So they were caught off guard. But he also said by being given the prize, he feels that the anti-nuclear movement has been given a much wider recognition than before. He hopes the issue of denuclearization will receive more global attention.
I now call upon Ms. Beatrice Finn and Ms. Setsuko Thurlov to give the Nobel Peace Prize lecture for 2017. It will be one speech in 2 parts, and Beatrice Finn, the floor is yours.
Your Majesties, Your Royal Highnesses, members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, esteemed guests, friends, campaigners, colleagues. Today it is my great honor to accept the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the thousands of inspirational people who make up the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. I am just one member of this huge grassroots movement who together have brought democracy to disarmament and are reshaping international law. We must humbly thank the Norwegian Nobel Committee for recognizing our work and giving momentum to our crucial cause. And we recognize all of those who so generously donate their time and energy to this campaign, all of ICAN's partner organizations. We thank the courageous foreign ministers, diplomats, Red Cross and Red Crescent staff, UN officials, academics, experts with whom we have worked in partnership to advance our common goal. And we thank all who are committed to ridding the world of this terrible threat. At dozens of locations around the world, in missile silos, buried in our ground, on submarines, navigating through our oceans, and aboard planes flying high in our sky lie 15,000 objects of humankind's destruction. And perhaps it is the enormity of this fact. Perhaps it is the unimaginable scale of the consequences that leads many to simply accept this grim reality, to go about our daily lives with no thought of the instruments of insanity all around us. For it is insanity to allow ourselves to be ruled by these weapons. Many critics of this movement suggest that we are the irrational ones, the idealists with no grounding in reality, that nuclear armed states will never give up their weapons. But we represent the only rational choice. We represent those who refuse to accept nuclear weapons as a fixture in our world, those who refuse to have their fates bound up in a few lines of launch code. Ours is the only reality that is possible. The alternative is unthinkable. The story of nuclear weapons will have an ending, and it is up to us to decide what that ending will be. Will it be the end of nuclear weapons? Or will it be the end of us? One of these things will happen. The only rational course of action is to cease living under the conditions where our mutual destruction is only one impulsive tantrum away. And today, I want to talk about three things: fear, freedom, and the future. By the very admission of those who possess them, the real utility of nuclear weapons is in their ability to provoke fear. When they refer to their deterrent effects, proponents of nuclear weapons are celebrating fear as a weapon of war. They are puffing their chests by declaring their preparedness to exterminate in a flash countless of thousands of human lives. Nobel laureate William Faulkner said, when accepting his prize in 1950, "There is only the question of, when will I be blown up?" But since then, this universal fear has given way to something even more dangerous: denial. Gone is the fear of Armageddon in an instant. Gone is the equilibrium between two blocks that was used as a justification for deterrence. Gone are the fallout shelters. But one thing remains: the thousands upon thousands of nuclear warheads that filled us up with that fear. The risk of nuclear weapons use is even greater today than at the end of the Cold War. But unlike the Cold War, today we face many more nuclear armed states, terrorists, cyber warfare. All of this makes us less safe. Learning to live with these weapons in blind acceptance has been our next great mistake. Fear is rational. The threat is real. We have avoided nuclear war, not through prudent leadership, but good fortune. And sooner or later, if we fail to act, our luck will run out. A moment of panic or carelessness, a misconstrued comment, or a bruised ego could easily lead us to the destruction of entire cities. A calculated military escalation could lead to the indiscriminate murder of civilians. If only a small fraction of today's nuclear weapons were used, ashes and smoke from the firestorm would loft high in the atmosphere, cooling, darkening, drying the Earth's surface for more than a decade. It would obliterate food crops, putting billions at risk of starvation. Yet we continue to live in denial of this existential threat. But Faulkner, in his Nobel speech, also issued a challenge to those who came after him. Only by being the voice of humanity, he said, can we defeat fear? Can we help humanity endure? And ICANN's duty is to be that voice, the voice of humanity, of humanitarian law, to speak up on behalf of civilians. Giving voice to that humanitarian perspective is how we will create the end of fear, the end of denial, and the end of nuclear weapons. And that brings me to my second point, freedom. As the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear Wars, the first ever anti-nuclear weapons organization to win this prize, said on this stage in 1985, "We physicians protest the outrage of holding entire world hostage. We protest the moral obscenity that each of us is being continuously targeted for extinction." And those words ring true still today. We must reclaim the freedom to not live our lives as hostages to imminent destruction. Man, not woman, made nuclear weapons to control others, but instead we are controlled by them. They made us false promises that by making the consequences of using these weapons so unthinkable, it would make any conflict unpalatable, that it would keep us free from war. But far from preventing war, these weapons brought us to the brink multiple times during the Cold War. And in this century, these weapons continue to escalate us towards war and conflict. In Iraq, in Iran, in Kashmir, in North Korea, their existence propels others to join the race. They don't keep us safe, they cause conflict. As fellow Nobel Peace Laureate Martin Luther King Jr. called them from this very stage in 1964, these weapons are both genocidal and suicidal. They are a madman's gun held permanently to our temple. These weapons were supposed to keep us free, but they deny us our freedom. It is an affront to democracy to be ruled by these weapons, but they are just weapons. They are just tools. And just as they were created by geopolitical context, they can just as easily be destroyed by placing them in a humanitarian context. And that is the task that ICANN has set itself. And my third point that I want to talk to, the future. I have the honor of sharing this stage today with Setsuko Thurlov, who has made it her life's purpose to bear witness to the horrors of nuclear war. She and the Hibakusha were at the beginning of this story, and it is our collective challenge to ensure that they will also witness the end of it. They relive their painful pasts over and over again so that we may create a better future. There are hundreds of organizations in ICANN that are making great strides towards that future. There are thousands of tireless campaigners around the world who work each day to rise to that challenge. And there are millions of people across the globe who have stood shoulder to shoulder with those campaigners to show hundreds of millions more that a different future truly is possible. And those who say that that future is not possible need to get out of the way of those making it happen. as the culmination of this grassroots efforts, through ordinary people standing up to the most powerful, this year, the hypothetical march forwards towards the actual, as 122 nations negotiated and concluded a UN treaty to outlaw these weapons of mass destruction. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons provides the pathway forward at a moment of great global crisis. It is a light in a dark time. And more than that, it provides a choice between the two endings, the end of nuclear weapons or the end of us. It is not naive to believe in the first choice. It is not irrational to think that nuclear states can disarm. It is not idealistic to believe in life over death. It is a necessity. All of us face that choice, and I call on every nation to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The United States, choose freedom over fear. Russia, choose disarmament over destruction. Britain, choose rule of law over oppression. And France, choose human rights over terror. China, choose reason over irrationality. And India, choose sense over senselessness. Pakistan, choose logic over Armageddon. And Israel, choose common sense over obliteration. And North Korea, choose wisdom over ruin. And to the nations who believe that they are sheltered under the umbrella of nuclear weapons, your enabling of the nuclear states will not make you any less complicit in the destruction of others in your name. To all nations around the world, choose the end of nuclear weapons over the end of us. This is the choice that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons represents. Join this treaty. We citizens are living under the umbrella of falsehoods. These weapons are not keeping us safe. They are contaminating our land and water, poisoning our bodies, holding hostage our right to life. So to all citizens of the world, stand with us. Demand your governments side with humanity and sign this treaty. We will not rest until all states have joined on the side of reason. No nation today boasts of being a chemical weapon state. No nation argues that it's acceptable under extreme circumstances to use sarin nerve agent. No nation proclaims the right to unleash on its enemy plague or polio. And that is because international norms have been set. Perceptions have changed. And now, at last, we have an unequivocal norm against nuclear weapons. Monumental strides forward never begin with universal agreement. But with every new signatory, and every passing year, this new reality will take hold. This is the way forward. There is only one way to prevent the use of nuclear weapons: prohibit and eliminate them. Nuclear weapons, like chemical weapons, biological weapons, cluster munitions, landmines before them are now illegal. Their existence is immoral. Their abolition is in our hands. The end is inevitable. But would that be the end of nuclear weapons or the end of us? We must choose one. We are a movement for rationality, for democracy, for freedom from fear. We are campaigners from 468 organizations who are working to safeguard the future. And we are representatives of the moral majority, the billions of people who choose life over death and who together will see the end of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
That was a Nobel lecture by Beatrice Finn, ICANN's executive director.
And now Setsuko Thurlow, ICANN's campaigner and a hibakusha, originally from Hiroshima, is going to deliver a speech. This is the first time a hibakusha stands on the podium on the ceremony.
Your Majesties, distinguished members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, my fellow campaigners here and throughout the world, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege to accept this award together with Beatrice on behalf of all the remarkable human beings who form ICANN movement. You each give me such a tremendous hope that we can and will bring the era of nuclear weapons to an end. I speak as a member of the family of hibakusha, those of us who survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For more than 7 decades, we have been working hard for the total abolition of nuclear weapons. We have stood in solidarity with those harmed by the production and testing of these horrific weapons around the world. People from places with long forgotten names, like Mururoa, Eka, Semipalatinsk, Maralanga, Bikini. People whose lands and seas were poisoned with radiation, whose bodies were experimented upon, whose cultures were forever disrupted. We are not content to be victims. We refuse to wait for a fiery end or to slow poisoning of our world. We refused to sit idly in terror as the so-called great powers took us past nuclear dusk and brought us recklessly close to nuclear midnight. We rose up. We shared our stories of survival. We said, nuclear weapons and humanities cannot coexist. Today, I want you to feel in this hall the presence of all those who perished in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I want you to feel above and around a great cloud of 250,000 souls. Each person had a name. Each person was loved by someone. Let us ensure that their deaths were not in vain. I was just 13 years old girl when the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on my city of Hiroshima. I remember that morning vividly. At 8:15, I saw a blinding bluish-white flash. I remember having the sensation of floating in the air. When I regained the consciousness in the total darkness and silence, I found myself pinned under the collapsed building. I knew I was faced with death. I began hearing faint voices of my classmates around me. Mother, help me. God, help me. Then all of a sudden, somebody shook my left shoulder from behind. The man saying, don't give up, keep pushing, keep kicking. You see the sun ray coming through that opening. Crawl toward it as quickly as possible. As I crawled out, the rubble was on fire. Most of my classmates in the same building were burned to death alive. I saw all around me utter, unrecognizable, unimaginable devastation. Procession of ghostly figures shuffled by. Grotesquely wounded people, they were bleeding, burned, blackened, and swollen. Parts of their bodies were missing. Flesh and skin hung from their bones. Some with their own eyeballs hanging in their hands. Some with their bellies burst open, their intestines hanging out. The foul stench of burnt human flesh filled the air. Thus, with one bomb, my beloved city was obliterated. Most of its residents were civilians who were incinerated, vaporized, carbonized. Among them, members of my own family and 351 schoolmates of mine. In the weeks, months, and years that followed, many thousand more would die, often in random and mysterious ways, from the delayed effects of radiation. Still to this day, radiation is killing survivors. Whenever I remember Hiroshima, the first image that comes to my mind is my 4-year-old nephew, Eiji. His little body transformed into an unrecognizable melted chunk of flesh. He kept begging for water in a faint voice until his death released him from agony. To me, he came to represent all the innocent children of the world, threatened as they are at this very moment by nuclear weapons. Every second of every day, nuclear weapons endanger everyone we love and everything we hold dear. We must not tolerate this insanity any longer. Through our agony and the sheer struggle to survive and to rebuild our lives from the ashes, we Hibakusha became convinced that we must warn the world about these apocalyptic weapons. Time and again, we shared our testimonies. But still, some refuse to see Hiroshima and Nagasaki atrocities as war crimes. They accepted propaganda that these were good bombs that had ended the war, just war. It was this myth that led the disastrous nuclear arms race, a race that continues to this day. 9 nations still threaten to incinerate entire cities, to destroy life on Earth, to make our beautiful world uninhabitable for our future generations. The development of nuclear weapons signifies not a country's elevation to greatness, but to its descent to the darkest depths of depravity. These weapons are not a necessary evil. They are the ultimate evil. On the 7th of July this year, I was overwhelmed with joy when a great majority of the world's nations voted to adopt the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Having witnessed humanity at its worst, I witnessed that day humanity at its best. We Hibakusha had been waiting for the ban for 72 years. Let this be the beginning of the end of nuclear weapons. All responsible leaders will listen to this, will sign this treaty, and history will judge harshly those who reject it. No longer shall their abstract theories mask the genocidal reality of their practices. No longer shall deterrence be viewed as anything but a deterrent to disarmament. No longer shall we live under the mushroom cloud of fear. To the officials of nuclear weapon nations and to their accomplices under the so-called nuclear umbrella, I say this: listen to our testimony, heed our warning, and know that your actions are consequential. You are each an integral part of the system of violence that threaten humankind. Let us all be alert to the banality of evil. To every president and prime minister of every nation of the world, I beseech you, join this treaty, forever eradicate the threat of nuclear annihilation. When I was a 13-year-old girl trapped in the smoldering rubble, I kept pushing, I kept moving toward the light. And I survived. Our light now is a banned treaty. To all in this hall and all listening around the world, I repeat those words that I heard in the ruins of Hiroshima. Don't give up. Keep pushing. Keep moving. See the light. Crawl towards it. Tonight, we march through the streets of Oslo with torches aflame. Let us follow each other out of the dark night of nuclear terror. No matter what obstacles we face, we will keep moving and keep pushing and keep sharing this light for others. This is our passion, our commitment for our one precious world to survive.
And that was a powerful speech by Sesko Thurlow, ICANN campaigner and atomic bomb survivor. We are seeing a big round of applause, a standing ovation for Sesko Thurlow. Now, Mickey, what impressed you most?
Well, she spoke from her heart. But we must remember that she's the only one of hundreds and thousands of people who went through the horrific experiences. But many have deceased already, and even if they are alive, you know, many of them can't speak English like Sesko Thurlow. And so her voice represents the whole of people who survived or died in the bombings. And I would like the world to remember that she is the voice of so many survivors in the world. And also, Beatrice Finn, the executive director of ICANN, said, quote, "We represent the only rational choice. Ours is the only reality that is possible. The alternative is unthinkable." Such powerful message from such young group who care about the world and uniting, really, the globe.
Yes, ICANN did begin in 2007. It is a very young organization. If you think of the decades that Sesko Thurlow and other hibakusha have spent saying this message, the message of peace, and a new organization like ICANN carrying on that message into the future.
That's right. It really, ICANN help many different organizations around the world to really unite and then come as a force to move the governments of many countries around the world.
A united effort. Well, Miki, as we're watching this ceremony, we are in our Tokyo studio. The year 2017 has also been one of heightened tensions in this part of the world, the East Asian region, because of North Korea's nuclear weapons program.
Exactly. The country has launched many missiles, boasting that its military is equipped with technology that can deliver missiles with nuclear heads to cities in the U.S. They've threatened a major hydrogen bomb test in the Pacific, and threats were exchanged between U.S. President Donald Trump and the leader Kim Jong-un.
Well, the Japanese government did not participate in the nuclear weapons ban treaty because officials say that it's not realistic, as nuclear weapons states do not support this treaty, and that Japan is protected under the so-called nuclear umbrella of the United States.
That's right. The U.S., the U.K., and France also didn't send their ambassadors to this peace award ceremony in protest. When the treaty was adopted back in July, those three nuclear powers issued a joint statement saying they don't intend to sign or even become party to the treaty. Therefore, there will be no change in the legal obligations with respect to nuclear weapons. Also, earlier this year, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said we have to be realistic in that we can't honestly say we can protect our people by allowing the bad actors to have them, and those of us that are good trying to keep peace and safety not to have them. So there's a sharp divide between those countries that do not possess such weapons and those that do, or rely on them for protection.
And of course, there's the argument that we have actually heard tonight as well, the argument that nuclear weapons are a valid tool for deterrence.
Yes, those who believe in deterrence would argue that thanks to the very existence of nuclear weapons, a nuclear war hasn't taken place for decades. But those who advocate for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, like ICAN, advocate weapons, argue that the current tension over Pyongyang's nuclear program is exactly the reason why there needs to be the ban. So on one hand, there are enthusiastic supporters and governments of over 100 countries looking for ways to erase nuclear weapons. On the other, fewer nations but strong powers that shun them.
Well, Miki, we just saw the royal family of Norway congratulating the winners of this year's Peace Prize. And we saw Akira Kawasaki from ICAN, who is one of the key members, and he's Japanese. You actually had the chance to sit down with him for an interview before he left for this ceremony in Oslo.
That's right. Akira Kawasaki is an ICAN International Steering Group member, and also one of the leaders of a Japanese NGO that works to educate people on Japan's horrific experience with nuclear weapons during World War II. I started off by asking him how he felt about ICAN being the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize.
It's a great honor, but at the same time, it is a matter of great responsibility, because now that we've got the treaty to ban nuclear weapons, and the Nobel Peace Committee decided to send a signal to move this treaty forward for the total elimination of nuclear weapons.
Kawasaki leads the Japanese civic group Peace Boat that's a member of ICAN. Peace Boat brings Japanese atomic bomb survivors on cruise ship voyages around the globe, sailing from country to country, sharing their experiences. Kawasaki feels that now more and more people outside of Japan are interested in their stories.
It's a kind of irony that here in Japan, it is said that the Japanese young people have been losing interest, although the stories of hibakusha are in textbook, and it's a part of official curriculum, and they are so easily accessible to that information. But now more and more young Japanese people say that we can't feel kind of interested in those old days story. But on the very contrary, the young people who I've met in many countries in other parts of the world are so keen to know more and question more. I think the story of hibakusha had not been well shared or informed in the past. So it's very new for most of the people, except Japan. And also, I think just 8 years ago, when the former president of the US, President Obama, delivered a historic speech in Prague for a nuclear weapon-free world, focusing on the moral responsibility of the nation that used nuclear weapons. And President Obama even came to Hiroshima. So that act had a very big impact on the people's perception or approach to this. So they've got human aspect or perspective in dealing with nuclear weapons issue.
ICAN pushed for the creation of the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty, even though nuclear weapons states and countries that rely on them for protection, including Japan, didn't take part in the process. Kawasaki believes this treaty is a game changer.
This treaty will change the value attached to nuclear weapons. Before the ban treaty, nuclear weapons have been thought as a symbol of power, and with such weapons, you can enter big nations club. But now, after the ban treaty, with this ban treaty, nuclear weapons is just wrong and bad weapons. So big political, economic, and social pressures will be put on the shoulders of those who possess nuclear weapons or who are relying on nuclear weapons. So now nuclear weapons are made illegal. So using nuclear weapons means that such a person or such a government will be regarded as a criminal. Use of nuclear weapons is now war crime. So it will make use of nuclear weapons more and more difficult. It's true that nuclear weapon states may not join this treaty in the short term or foreseeable future, but having such a strong normative pressure, they cannot live with nuclear weapons for a long time.
How do you feel as a Japanese citizen about the fact that Japan didn't participate in the process of making the treaty?
It's very frustrating and disappointing. And it's a shame. It's a shame. The Japanese government have been talking repeatedly, publicly, in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki commemoration that Japan is a nation that calls for a nuclear weapon-free world. And they even said they are taking the lead in this endeavor. But in reality, Japan even did not participate in this debate. So in this process of making the ban treaty, Japan lost its credibility on the worldwide nuclear disarmament efforts.
Do you think there's still a room for the government to change its course and participate in it?
Yes, the public opinion can change it. I would like to make this Peace Prize ceremony as a starting point or kick-off point for the Japanese public to review and reconsider our nation's position on nuclear weapons.
But how would you refute to an official who would say, but nuclear umbrella is keeping us safe?
There's no logical ground this nuclear umbrella will function, or their logic of nuclear deterrence will be functioning. If Japan claims, okay, there are the nuclear weapons of North Korea, so we have to protect ourselves by the US nuclear weapons. Okay, so if the nuclear weapons versus nuclear weapons, if you accept this logic, then many other states are also start to talk about the same. So we will eventually come to a world full of nuclear weapons. Every country will start to acquire nuclear weapons. And is it a safe world? The answer is very clear.
The average age of living hibakshas is now over 81. Many of them are still willing to travel to any corner of the world to tell their stories. But there will come a day when they can't do that anymore. What do you think would be the best way to continue their legacy?
Well, I think nuclear weapons ban treaty is one way to continue the legacy, because the actual sufferers will go soon or late. The real message that this suffering should not be repeated is now written in this very important treaty. So promoting this treaty is a way to pass down the message of hibakusha.
Lastly, what's your message now to the people around the world, especially young generation?
We can change the world, as we did make this treaty by civil society efforts in partnership with the government and Red Cross and so on. We can change the world. So if this very bad weapons exist, if you stand up and take action, you can change it. It was shown by ICANN's efforts so far, and that was recognized by the Nobel Peace Committee. So young people, you can follow it, and you can make much more better change to come.
Well, we heard from Akira Kawasaki. If I can, the Nobel Peace Prize is something to be celebrated. But as Mr. Kawasaki says, this issue should be discussed more among the public in this country.
What's encouraging is that, as Kawasaki-san points out, now more and more young people around the world are showing interest in this issue. And for example, the number of foreign visitors to Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum is much higher than the past. And the movement includes younger activists like Beatrice Finn. So we will need to see whether there will be more active discussions on this issue in our own country, in Japan, the only one that's experienced 2 nuclear bombings during the war.
And in fact, we actually have seen people in Hiroshima, it will coinciding with this peace ceremony, also having an event of their own.
Right. Some 100 people of Hiroshima on Saturday lit 1,000 candles that said, "I can with you," to congratulate and show unity with the movement in Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. And about 220 hibakshas from Hiroshima and Nagasaki together have flown into Oslo to attend various discussions with young people of Norway too. Also, a piano which was damaged in the atomic bombing in Hiroshima and repaired has been brought to Oslo, and it will be played at a concert on December the 11th. So it's a great day for Hiroshima and Nagasaki people especially, and should be for Japan as well.
That's right. So we really are seeing a connection on this day between Norway and efforts that have been made in Japan, the only country that has experienced atomic bombings.
And around the globe.
Yes, that's right. Well, we have been covering the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony 2017. It's come to a close, but discussions, of course, on nuclear disarmament are far from over. NHK World will continue to follow the efforts of the hibakshas.
That's right.
Yes, as well as the debate that will continue on nuclear weapons and how it will develop at the United Nations and between nations around the world. I'm Minoru Takao with NHK Newsline Editor-in-Chief Miki Ebara. Thank you all for joining us on this special edition of NHK Newsline.